There are a few crepe paper tricks that I wish I had known before I got started. They would have saved me time, paper, and frustration. These tips made my flowers look dramatically better. Today, I'm sharing the biggest tips and mistakes to avoid. So let's jump in. The first thing that we should talk about when working with crepe paper is the tools that we need when you are making flowers out of crepe paper. So this is the supplies that I like to use. So let's go over them in a little bit more detail. When working with crepe paper, you will need a cutting tool. Now you can either use regular scissors, you can use pinking shears to add a nice edge, or you can even use a cutting machine like your Cricut. And I will go through how to use your Cricut later on in this video. When trying to attach your crepe paper to the stems of your flowers, you're going to need either a glue gun or regular crafting glue. Now, I find that using your glue gun to attach the stem to the petals is ideal because it has good adhesion and it dries quickly. But if you are trying to glue crepe paper to crepe paper, like when you are making petals or leaves, using regular glue works better, just because I find that when you are overlapping crepe paper with lots of glue, the regular craft glue dries thinner than your standard hot glue, which will make the flower more bulky at the joints where they are glued. Also, I want to point out that if you are using hot glue, there are two types of glues that you could use. You could use high temperature glue or a low temperature glue. Ideally, you want to use a low temperature glue so that you do not melt the paper or make the color in the paper bleed. When you are assembling your flowers, you will need some wire to make stems out of for your flowers. I like to use thicker flower wire for the body of the stem. So like if I am using this to hold the flower up, and then I will use this thinner wire, which is very thin, for attaching it to the leaves or the petals that need wire inside of them so that they can be bent in the directions that we want them to. Now, when you're buying these, you don't need to go and buy the most expensive brands. Ideally, you want them to be either green so that they match the color of the leaves, or you can have them in a white color, which I don't currently have, but they can always be painted or covered in with the crepe paper that you're using. Now, when you're using the floral wire, the thin wires don't need this, but the thicker wires will need pliers so that you can move and roll the ends of your stems so that the flowers stay attached to the stem and petals better. So you will need a set of pliers for that. And finally, for manipulating our designs and for helping our work be a little bit more effective, we have these butterfly clips, which are fantastic for holding together our crepe paper and our templates so that they don't move around. It'll make cutting much faster so that you can do several at a time. And also these scraper tools. You can just have a generic one or a brand name one like from the Cricut that I have. And all we do with these is we use these to help us curl the leaves or give them more shape in the areas that we want so that the flowers look more realistic. You can find a full list of supplies that I've used in this video in the description below. These tips work whether you're brand new or you've already made lots of flowers. When you are making flowers, it's ideal to have a template so that cutting can be faster for you in the end and so that your petal shapes will all have the same size. Now, you can either use cardboard if you would like to give you a more sturdy template, or you could just use regular paper like printer paper or even cardstock, whatever you have handy. And all you do is just cut these out so that you have a template. Now, you don't need to use a template. You can just cut each piece out individually, but this helps out. Now, I like to use old cereal boxes as my cardboard templates because I happen to have lots of those around and they're fairly sturdy. When cutting out templates, ideally, you can do several at a time so that it's much faster instead of just doing one. What I like to do is I'll fold my paper several times, and then I'll use my butterfly clips to hold the design in place. This makes it easier to cut because then I don't have to worry about anything moving around. Now, once I get to the halfway point, I'm going to flip around to the other side. And now I have petals of identical size. Now, when I'm using my paper template, it's a little bit trickier because the paper is not as thick as my cardboard. But again, I'm going to be using my butterfly clips to hold it in place and then just cut it out so that the design stays in place. And again, I have 4 leaves that I can use for my petals. Now, if you want more of the individual petals, you can just cut longer sections of your crepe paper and fold it multiple times to have more. So let's talk about cutting our crepe paper. Now, before I mentioned you can have scissors, you can have pinking shears. I didn't mention my paper cutter, but you can use your paper cutter to cut out large sections of your crepe paper. So if you know a length that you need and you need to cut the full width of it, you can use your paper cutter for a faster cut. Scissors are great for precision cutting when you have petals to cut. They do work great, but if you have a lot of cutting to do, your hands might get sore, so it's not always the best option. But for beginner purposes, just having scissors that will cut through your crepe paper is all you need. And you can use them to cut through the paper with the grain or against the grain. And they just cut through it to give you your shapes. Additionally, there is the option of using pinking shears. Now these are great for when you want to cut the insides of your flowers and you want them to have a little bit more depth. So you can give it a nice edge, and then when you're working with your flowers later, this edge will be very lifelike once you've cut it all up into pieces. Another option for cutting is using a cutting machine. Now, if you have a Cricut maker, you will have the option to have a rotary cutting blade, and that's what you'll need to use when you're cutting crepe paper. You can't cut it with your regular blade because it's going to just crinkle the paper instead of cutting it. So you need to be using the rotary blade instead. Now, if you have a silhouette, they also have machines with rotary blades, so like the Cameo 4 does have that. So you would need to make sure that you have a rotary blade attached for your machine instead of the standard blade. If you're using your cutting machine for cutting crepe paper, you want to either use the purple mat for strong grip or the pink mat for fabric. You can use your green mats if they are clean and very sticky. Mine are not, so I don't recommend using those. Now, when you are applying your crepe paper to your cutting mat, you need to make sure that you are placing your paper in the correct direction and that you're giving it a good stick down. Now, the direction in which you cut your petals will impact the design at the end of your project. So we want to make sure that we're always cutting in the correct order. Now, typically if you're making your own designs, it may be hit or miss which way you're going to have to align the design, but if you are buying a pattern from somebody, they will tell you how to use that design, which way the grain should go. So for the petals that I'm doing right now, I want the design to go, the grain to go up and down on the page. So I'm just going to make sure that this is sticking down well. Now, if you have a braying tool, you can use your braying tool to squish this down really well. Or if you do not, I like to just use my cover for my cutting mat, and then I'll use my hand to really squish this down. Now, we don't want to be squishing it down to the point where we're stretching it, just enough so that it's holding it down on the mat. So this needs to be very sticky. When you are using your cutting machine to cut your crepe paper, you might need to do a little bit of experimentation with the settings that you use. Personally, I have found that using the crepe paper setting works just fine for my cutting machine, but you might need to do some attempts on a small section to make sure that it cuts out properly and cuts all the way through. Now, before you take it off, you can do a quick check to see if it has come loose on the design, and then just pull it out of the machine if you're happy with it. And now I've got my petals cut out. And just to show you what it looks like if you are using your regular fine point blade to cut the crepe paper, so that you don't have to try this at home by yourself. And that's what that looks like. When you're working with crepe paper, the direction of the grain makes a difference in how it's going to turn out in your final project. In these petals, I've got the grain in two different directions. So if I've got these in the same layout, my grain is going left to right here, and here it's going up and down. Now, for the grain where it's going up and down, if I pull the center of my petal, it's going to give me a sort of a rounded petal look. But in the one where I have the grain going the opposite direction, I can't pull it this way. I can only pull it this way. So it's going to change my petal to go to fold this way. So when we're working with crepe paper, the direction of the grain when we're cutting does have an impact. So any designs that you buy, you're going to need to make sure that you're following their directions on how to set it up for cutting it with the grain. Now also, when you're using your own designs, ideally for petals, you want the grain to go up and down, and the same thing for leaves on your stems. But you can do them sideways to have the petals fold the opposite direction, but that's going to give you a completely different look. So that's something to keep in mind. When you are working with crepe paper, there's a few things that you should keep in mind when you are stretching this. Now, you can stretch the whole leaf out all the way if you want. You can stretch out top parts or middle parts or the whole thing. But depending on where you stretch it will give you a different shape. So you don't always want to stretch the whole petal. You might just want to stretch part of it so that it gives you a more open look at the top and a more closed look at the bottom. Earlier we talked about our tools, and if you have a scraper tool, you can use your scraper tool to shape your petals. So just simply pulling the petal out with your scraper tool will give it a curled shape like so. Now you don't need to pull or stretch the crepe paper when you're doing this. You just use your scraper tool and you give it a little bit of a curl. Now this takes some practice to get some nice definition and so that it's not choppy, but that's the way that the leaf looks. So you have your stretched and you have your curled. Now, when you're working with crepe paper, the one thing that you shouldn't do, even though you will see me doing it sometimes, is you don't want to pull the whole crepe paper all the way stretched out, because then you're losing the design, the texture on it, and you're kind of just stuck with a piece of paper. However, when I'm working with my stems, I will stretch my green crepe paper all the way so that I can wrap it around my stems to cover up the wire, because I do not have any flower tape. When you're using glue on your crepe paper, you want to be applying a small thin bead of glue so that it doesn't show up or leave a large impression on your crepe paper. So here I'm just using regular crafting glue, and you'll see that it's just nice and clear. We're gonna let this dry and I'll show it to you again in a moment. Now for this leaf, I'm just going to use a little bit of hot glue instead to demonstrate to you what happens if you're using hot glue instead. Now again, this is the same leaf that I just did, but it's going to be attached together with hot glue. So now this is the petal that I use just the regular glue, and you'll see that I can still bend the center of these leaves and give my leaf some definition if I would like. Right, so I can curl it if I would like, or I can even stretch it. This one here with the hot glue, just by holding onto it, I can feel the glue in the center because the hot glue has more substance to it, but I can adjust them and move them, but the manipulation of the leaves is actually very hard in the spot where the glue is because it's so thick. So it's something to keep in mind. So you can still maneuver it, but it's very difficult to move, and it almost feels like the paper is fighting you with the glue in that area. When we're attaching our stems to our flowers, I'm going to show you what happens. We're going to do one that's bent like so, so that we've got a nice edge here, and then we're going to use one that's flat. When we're using a stem that's got a bit of a curl to it, you can sort of loop it through one of your cut spots so that it stays even better. What we're going to do is we're going to add a bunch of glue onto this so that it holds it in place, so that we can roll this in on itself. Now I like to shut these with regular craft glue because that allows the stem not to be so thick. Now, as you practice this, you can make this edge less, or this loop less large, but we're going to let that dry for a moment. I'm going to do the same thing now with this one, which has no end on it, or no curl at the end, and we're going to roll this as well. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of a difference, because over time this can have a difference for you. This is the one with the looped end, and so if I'm pulling this, this isn't coming out. I'm giving this a really good pull. This one here, I'm pulling it and it's kind of holding on better, but I can actually see it starting to move here in my design. And so when we're doing this, you always want to make sure that you're petal's not going to come out. So having the loop will actually hold it a little bit better. Now my loop is a little bit large, so you can see the shape is a little bit off here at the end, but that's okay. When we finish the flower off, you'll see that it's not a huge big deal. When you're using wire for petals, I recommend using 2 pieces of crepe paper so that the petal hides the wire on both sides. So simply grabbing 2 pieces of petal so that your wire can be hidden in the middle. This can be a little bit tricky sometimes when you're trying to get your wire to stick in the right spot in the center. Now I recommend using just regular crafting glue because I don't like the feel that the flowers get later if you're using hot glue. But this way, once this dries, you'll be able to bend your stem in any direction that you want. There's lots of ways that you can add color to your crepe paper so that it looks more vibrant and more full of life. One of the methods that I like to use is to use alcohol markers, and I'll typically do this on the stamen portion of my flowers so that it can add a little bit more color. Now I'm using alcohol markers, but you can use any type of markers, and these ones are pretty thick, and so the color will come through on the other side. But in the spots where it hasn't come through, I can just add some more. This is a cute little way to add color to your flowers so that they have a little bit more detail. Now my center of my flower has a little bit of color. Another way to add color to your crepe paper project is simply by using acrylic paint. Now I'm just using a generic acrylic paint. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, and you need to use a paintbrush. Now the better you are at painting, the better the results will be. So if you have a shaky hand, you're not going to have the greatest results. It takes time and practice to get better. But similarly to what we did with the pens, all we need to do is add accents to our design. For this one here, I'm going to add a little bit of depth into the leaf of my flower, and I'm just going to use a darker green color so that I can add a little bit more depth into it. Now, when you're painting the leaves, you have to remember that this is going to take a little bit of time to dry, and you have to have a good idea of where you want the design and the accents of your leaves to look. Now, my painting abilities are not the greatest, but as you practice and get better with it, you will have more abilities to have nicer accents on this. So just adding a little bit of color will make your leaves have a little bit more depth and look a little bit more realistic. Finally, you can use pencil crayons, markers, or pastels, whichever way you would like to add more features to your flowers. Again, it all just takes time and practice to get the colors that you would like to have working for you. Typically, with ends like this, where you've got lots of bits from your flower body, you can use floral wire to cover it up. But if you don't have floral wire, you can just use green crepe paper to cover it up. And so I'm just going to use a little bit of green paper, and I'm going to wrap it around the whole body of my stem here. And I'm simply just going to use glue and apply this around my flower here, close up to the end. Now, if you have floral tape, you can use that instead, but if you don't want to be buying more supplies, you can just use this, or even just regular paper. Now the flower bottom is not showing any of the stems. Finally, the last tip that I have for making flowers is just keep practicing and don't give up. It takes a lot of time to make beautiful flowers and to get them to turn out the way that you would like them to be. Crepe paper gets easier when you stop fighting it and start understanding how it behaves. If you've discovered some tips that I've missed, be sure to leave them in the comments below, because we're always learning from each other. And if you want more flower tutorials, reviews, or paper experiments, watch these videos here. Thanks so much for watching, and happy crafting!